Hi, everyone, and welcome to Conversations on Sex, Addiction, and Relationships. I'm Dan Drake, and I'm joined with Wendy Conquest and Tim Stein. And Jeannie Vitoni's not with us today, but she'll be joining us in the future. So today we're going to do a mailbag episode, or as I'm gonna give you a hard time, Wendy. As Wendy would say, a mailbag episode. All right, we got a couple questions that I wanted to get to. And they're really good. They're interesting topics for us to consider. So the first one, the person says, if the addict did not attend a 12-step program, so it's basically this person was discouraged in a previous episode. It looks like when we talked about relapse, that addicts can relapse, and that was discouraging. So this is, I assume, a betrayed partner. That can obviously bring up a lot of anxiety. So they say, if the addict did not attend a 12-step program, is the chance of that addict relapsing a lot higher? And then the addict did attend and still attends his own therapy, but does not share with his wife what he does or goes through in therapy. So, what do you think? Someone's in therapy, but looks like they're kind of keeping what they're doing to themselves. They're not doing 12 step. Does that by itself make the odds of relapse higher? Let's talk about relapse.
Well, I will preface this by saying I hope I'm wrong. And I tell this to people frequently. I hope I'm wrong. There are people that are the exceptions and they prove me to be wrong. And when that happens, I'm actually rather happy. However, if somebody is not attending 12 steps, in my experience, it undermines their success with sobriety um, across the board. There was some interesting research that Pat Carnes did many, many years ago. It got published in one of his old original books called Don't Call It Love. Um, and one of the things that came out of that research when they were uh, getting information from multiple sex addicts out there that were in recovery is that they found that the sex addicts who had solid, consistent sobriety had a number of things in common, but the three primary things that showed up for them that they had in common is that they all had done individual therapy, they had all done group therapy, and they were all involved in 12-step programs. Um, and there's just something about a 12-step program, and I think it has a lot to do with the community, has a lot to do with just sort of taking time to sort of soak yourself in that recovery experience with other people who are doing it. And then there's the steps. There's the steps are not about sobriety. The steps are about spiritual healing. And if you're going to change your life in that kind of a meaningful way, being involved in a 12-step program, whether it's a formal 12-step program or whether it's one of the offshoots like Celebrate Recovery, that's, a very uber Christian version of 12-step. But being involved in a 12-step program somewhere where you've got that community, you've got those steps you're walking through, it just seems to shore up your foundation. And it's one of those three pillars that I know I consistently recommend to addicts if they want consistent, solid sobriety moving forward. You need to have that. Now, are there people that I've worked with that haven't been involved in a 12-step program and they've been able to stay sober? Yeah, I wouldn't say they're the majority. And and if somebody's coming to me and asking me what I recommend that they do, I'm going to say do those three things. It's going to give you the best chance at having that consistent, solid sobriety, which is why they're coming to see me in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking what you just said, Tim. I was looking at Facing the Shadow at the and Pat Carnes has the same that list, and it's in there, and those were common for a lot of them. And it's the offshoots, developing a spiritual life, addressing kind of family of origin wounds and trauma, dealing with partner and relational injuries. That like those are all here. Can't
Yeah.
argue with people that did make it that Carnes has studied.
Yeah. I want to be careful here. What I'm hearing is that the partner is saying, I really am afraid that there's going to be a relapse. I hear that 12-step groups, meetings are a good deterrent to that. And so I'm imagining that the partner says, see, The folks on conversations say that you have to attend 12-step meetings in order to not relapse. And then the person's forced, quote unquote, to go. And, they sit in the meetings and they sit back and they listen and they're on their phone and they're not really getting a sponsor. They're not engaged in the program. They start doing the meetings through Zoom and doing other things. And so that's not really doing 12-step work. That's really not attending the program. So when people first come in, I basically say, look, the 12 steps and the 12-step community and therapy dovetail really well together. They complement each other. So, can you do one without the other and stay sober? Yeah. But when you combine those two, it is really powerful. It's it's a really good formula for all the different dynamics of addressing the addiction right on, of addressing all the different traumas that you've had, addressing how you came to be here, really leaning into a community, having sponsorship where you have accountability that also leads into your accountability with your therapy. Um, so like you said, Tim, can you be sober without it? Yeah, can you be sober doing only 12 step and not being doing therapy? Well, yes, but sobriety I don't think is the only piece. There's this recovery piece, right, of really finding out and addressing how this came to be and all the different pieces that have been missing from your life and from your relationships because of how you were brought up and then using this coping mechanism.
Yeah, there's actually
Yeah.
two
Go ahead,
questions
Tim.
here.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and the one question is,
That's
what
what I want to get to
about
too.
what about sobriety and recovery, sobriety and being able to stay sober and not relapse? And step into the 12-step program, that's going to help to shore that piece up. And it's also going to support recovery. But the other piece that I actually find myself being concerned about is the lack of transparency that the addict has around what he's realizing in therapy and not sharing that with his partner. And for me, it could go one of two ways. Either this particular person is still really struggling with just letting himself be known anywhere. And that's an aspect of recovery that if he isn't able to open up anywhere and let anyone in, I don't really fancy his chances of sobriety, recovery, and moving forward because we know that for success in sobriety and recovery, it's essential that you let other people in and guide you and know what's going on, and you're not keeping secrets and you're not withholding and denying, and you've sort of shifted those patterns. The other one is that maybe he is being transparent in other places, but there's some dynamic in the relationship that's getting in the way of him sharing with her, which for me doesn't necessarily speak to his sobriety and recovery pieces, but it does speak to me about the viability of the relationship. And can they find a way through where he can open up and share more with the partner about what's going on, where she can be present and hear what's happening, and they can find a relational way of starting to open up with that information. But I would want him to go to 12-step programs for sobriety, but I'm almost relationally more concerned about his unwillingness to share what he's working on in therapy. Dan, it sounded like that was kind of like where you were going there too.
Yeah, well, I have a couple thoughts, and I appreciate what both of you are saying. On that, I think, in my 2 cents, I hear this a decent amount where the partner wants to know, what are you doing in therapy, and then the addict says, it's my private space. I need to have this privacy for my therapy. I think two things can exist at the same time. I agree with that. You know, we do need a place where we can have that's private, that you can process things and have it, be safe and completely there. That said, I also think transparency is important. So for the betrayed partner to understand what's happened in therapy, what are you growing in? What are you learning? What are you focusing on? I think that's absolutely helpful for relational healing. So I don't think that I think people use the privacy thing almost like a wall to shut the partner out completely. And I don't think that's, like you said, Tim, I don't think that doesn't provide the safety and transparency that the partner is going to need to because there's a lot of trust. If I'm working with an addict, I recognize that the betrayed partner, there's a trust level that we're actually working on something, and that they're the addict's taking this seriously. And there's a trust level when there's been a breach in trust and betrayal, and maybe by other providers prior. So I take that very seriously. So yeah, I guess I want to make that distinction. I do think there's privacy that you can have in your therapy, but also transparency to bring, sometimes I'll have people bring what are what's the top one, two, or three things that you're taking from our session today. Share those maybe high level things with their partner. These are the things that I'm addressing or growing in. So that kind of a thing. But to your point too, I think, and I think this is what you said, Wendy. I was also going to say, you know, we can be we get out of anything what we put into it. So just saying, yeah, go to 12 step and automatically you're going to have sobriety or not relapse. That's just not the case. Cause I've had people even spend a bunch of time in therapy and they're not really that motivated to do the work. And to me, that's something that, the person has to have a willingness to actually engage the process and not be a tourist along the way. They have to, actually actively work it. It doesn't work if you don't work it. So I think just a prescription, you do this thing, isn't going to itself. The person has to have a hard attitude that they want to do something different. They want to keep growing and have the sobriety. So to me, those things are pretty critical.
Well, the thought, yeah, the thought I had also was, oh, this is interesting. So this person's going to therapy and they're saying, this is my therapy. I really don't need to share. And in classic psychotherapy, that's absolutely accurate.
Right.
But so then I thought, oh, wait a minute, is this person a certified sex addiction therapist saying this? Or is it a generalist therapist that this person is going to see that doesn't really understand the dynamics of sex addiction, betrayal trauma? Because it makes sense to me that a generalist would say that. I would be disappointed if a certified sex addiction therapist would say that, like, no, this is you for you. You don't have to share anything. Because it sounds like the whole reason, right, that they're going to therapy is around the sex addiction. So there's been enough harm done with secret keeping and things being separate. And I like both of you. It's if people are going to therapy or they're going to a 12-step meeting, it's hey, yes, there's anonymity to a 12-step meeting and perhaps anonymity to your therapy, but you can say, this is what I learned. This is what I took away. This is what the epiphany that I had. This is what I want to work on. This is what I've been told to work on. That's so helpful for the partner, which is so helpful. So yeah, I
One
hope.
other,
Yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
go ahead, Wendy.
No, no, go ahead.
There was I'm curious the distinction. I agree. I think 12 step is valuable for honestly, any human being, whether they're addict or not. I think any human could benefit from working the steps. That's my 2 cents. But I think there might be a difference too. I'm curious what you think. If someone's in individual therapy and group therapy, if they're really working on that, I don't think group replaces 12 step, but if someone's really targeting in maybe a long-term healthy group, like they can target some of the intimacy disorder stuff that underlies, um, you know, maybe what under was underneath all this in the first place. So I've seen a lot of benefit from people being in group therapy, in addition to individual. I would be a little bit more concerned if this person is only an individual and isn't talking with anybody else. They're kind of isolated. They don't have maybe accountability or other people in their life that they're not addressing this with. I think that's the beauty of what 12 step offers, and even what group offers, is you're vulnerable with other human beings and other peers too, not just a therapist. I think that's invaluable.
Yeah, I think that there's value in group therapy and individual therapy, and they have different values. I mean, like you're
Right.
saying, group therapy, you're in this group of people where you're pushing each other, you're challenging each other, you're supporting each other, which is when you go to a 12-step meeting, there's no feedback, and so you have your sponsor and you're working with them, but in a group, there's a whole different dynamic of this group sort of helping you and challenging you and pointing out your blind spots to you in a different way, and developing those social skills and social interactions and all that kind of stuff. But individual therapy is more of a place of like, hey, this is your own stuff that's bubbling up, not with other people working with you. This is just your space to go work on your stuff to deal with it so it doesn't come back and, blindside you and throw you way off into, your addiction or into trauma or into other kinds of things. So, um, I think I think they're both valuable in their own way. I certainly don't think people need to do individual therapy and group therapy for the rest of their life.
Right, right.
But I do think that they serve different purposes, and there's a reason that people that find themselves having long-term find themselves, that people who are able to create long-term solid sobriety, I think there's a reason that those common denominators are individual therapy, group therapy, and 12 step.
Yeah.
I love
I
that reframe, Tim.
yeah. I think also this piece is that I've been becoming aware of is a group isn't a group isn't a group. So,
True.
so is there a group focus? How is the group run? Is there a maximum amount of people in the group? What's allowed, what's not allowed? Is there a workbook involved or not? Or, so I would want to know more about which groups people are in, right? And is it a good fit? Uh, so that I just had to throw that in there.
No,
That's a
I'm
good
with you.
point.
I mean, one of the primary things I ask people is, are you in a group run by Wendy Conquest? And, if they say yes, I'm like, you're in good hands.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Hey, Dan, do we
Well,
have any questions?
yeah, I was gonna say let's shift to another question. But before, let me pause for a second and remind everybody you're listening to Conversations on Sex Addiction and Relationships, and we're doing a mailbag episode. All right. So this question I am going to paraphrase a little bit because the wording was a bit confusing, but essentially it was a really good question. And I don't know where it came from what episode, but essentially the question was, why don't these people, which is us, why don't we believe in divorce? It sounds like we're pushing relationships maybe when they shouldn't, when we should consider the option of divorce for, especially after betrayal. So why I'm curious about that. I'm wondering where that person would assume that we're, only for relationships sticking together. But what do you guys think? Are we for only for relationships staying together? Do we advocate for divorce?
Well, this was a great question. I was so happy that this person wrote in because it's given me the awareness that when we're doing episodes, we're talking a lot about addict and partner and what they can do to repair. And I was like, wow, okay, so that seems to be then translating to we don't advocate for separation or divorce. And so I just want to say that and it's in my disclosure, it's in my paperwork. When people come in, I basically say, look, I am not going to advocate one way or another. If you come to me and you say, Wendy, I don't want to deal with this. I want a divorce. I will say, I'm with you. If you say, I really want to see how far this goes and really hang in there and give it, a good go, I will say, I'm with you. So I'm going to support my client no matter which way they decide. And I have certainly had partners come in and say, I'm giving it 2 months and then I'm out. It's like, I understand. I understand. So I've had partners who have divorced, and I've had partners that have stayed in the relationship. So, so I'm not against divorce. I'll just say that right from the get-go.
Yeah, I don't find myself being anti-divorce. It's not where I go. I will own, I tend to be a bit of a romantic. And so initially I tend to root for the relationship to make it. But I have worked with plenty of addicts. I've known plenty of people, addicts and non-addicts in my life that have gotten divorced. And I've seen the benefit as well as the challenges that have come to them after divorce. I've seen partners that I've worked with that have decided to get a divorce, and I've seen the challenges, and I've also seen the benefits and the growth that has come with that. The same way that I have seen the benefits, challenges, and the growth that comes from staying in the relationship. Um, so I really think it's everybody's individual course in where they want to go. For me, if somebody can tolerate trying to work in the relationship, there's a lot of personal growth and a lot of personal insight that can come from that, whether you choose to ultimately stay in the relationship or not. So, my suggestion is stay in and see what's there. See what work you can do, what you can tolerate, what you can't tolerate, where you can grow, where you're challenged, and take advantage of the growth. You might choose to leave, but you can always choose to leave. You can't really choose to try to come back if you've already left. But so
I mean, I say to all my partners, look, you're going to have to deal with your trauma,
yeah,
whether it's in the relationship or not in the relationship. So let's just get that straight right from the beginning. And so if you think that divorcing is going to rid you of all this awful stuff that's happened, that is not the case.
I couldn't. Yeah, I was just gonna say that too, Wendy. And especially, it's been heartbreaking. It's been heartbreaking to see, and there's an injustice either way, right? That you can't just. And I think some addicts have that delusion that somehow, okay, if you just cut me out of your life, you can move on with your life and you won't have to heal. But that's just not the case. The partner's going to have betrayal and they're going to have trauma either way. That's going to affect them. And I've seen that if someone doesn't do the healing, they can just get caught in earnest and the injustice of it, and it just sort of festers that space for themselves. So it's not fair. I'll say that it's not fair to have to do that. Even if you're not with your significant other more, but it's the reality. Just we often say, use this analogy. If I were rear-ended in a car accident, 100 by a drunk driver, 100% not my fault. But if I have injuries sustained, I'm gonna have to go to the hospital, or I'm gonna have to do some rehab. I'm gonna have to do something. And again, not fair, but unfortunately, there's injuries that I have to heal from. And I think these emotional wounds are still there that we have to heal from. But I will say, Tim, I've had to recognize this over the years. My first tendency is to root for relationships, and sometimes that has been a blind spot. I think when it's time, when I'm maybe fighting harder for something that's either toxic, or if there's abuse or something, that's a situation where it's if it's not healthy to stay, if there's abuse or other things going on that are perpetuating, of course. Or even, I will say, sometimes the best outcomes I've seen, I think of some, and I'm thinking specifically of a couple of partners where they were on their healing journey and they really did a lot of work. Unfortunately, the addict in their life didn't wasn't able or willing to do the same amount of work, and the partner said, "You know what, I can't do this anymore." And their growth, their kind of it came from post traumatic growth. It was, I've done this healing, and unfortunately, you're not keeping up with me, and I can't be in this relationship because you're not fighting for sobriety or recovery or this relationship. And
I
that's honestly been the most empowering space. I've had people graduate from groups um, in a healthy place because they've done their work, and their relationship didn't make it, but they're stronger than ever. So sometimes divorce is the best option. Doesn't automatically make the pain go away or the betrayal or the trauma go away.
and I've seen that. I've also seen it come from the other side, where addicts are doing amazingly good work,
Yeah.
and a partner, for whatever reason, is just not able to step into their own healing work, is not able to sort of acknowledge what's going on, and at some point, the addict is like, I want you to see me who I am. I can't stay here because you keep seeing me based on who I was back in my addiction. And now I don't recommend that if it's like 3 months in, but years out,
Yeah.
sometimes happens. I will say on a little bit of a lighthearted note, I heard a story about one partner whose attitude was, I'm not divorcing him. Yeah, he struggles, but he has done a lot of work, and I had to put up with all the pain of his addiction. I'm not going to let somebody else reap the benefits of him in recovery.
And that happens too, right? The addict gets is the best version of themselves.
Yeah.
through the work if they really do it. I'm curious though. This brings up you alluded to this, Wendy. Kind of a mini conversation about our conversations. Do you guys feel like we give off? This person had the question. I just wondered, do we tend to kind of fight for relationships, or is that kind of our bent without even really knowing it in our conversations?
Oh, on the podcast?
Yeah.
That's a great question. That is a great question. I mean, because so many of the books and the workbooks and everything are about how to build intimacy, how to, right, keep your relationship, how to, so, so I think that's a really great question. And are we holding hope? Is that part of what we're doing? I remember in grad school, my supervisor basically said, your main job, Wendy, is to hold hope when you're doing therapy. This was before CSAT and everything else, a brand new clinician. He said that's your main job, is to hold hope. And I thought that was very interesting. He had been um, uh, a psychologist for 30 plus years, so in the field way longer than me. It's always stuck with me. Is that part of my job or not?
I don't
And what
know.
is hope? Hope for
Yeah.
what?
Well, I hope for relational healing, maybe when it's appropriate. Hope for individual healing, regardless. Absolutely. I I don't know that as a podcast that we overtly hold that bias. But when I think about the conversations we have, we're usually talking about either the work that we couples are doing or that individuals are doing in a coupleship to try to heal, to show up, to be present, to find their way through the pain and the betrayal and, recovery and sobriety and all that stuff to the other side. Or we're talking about the individual's work and what they have to do for their own individual healing, whether they're in the relationship or not. And so when we're talking about work that someone is doing within a relationship, the implication is that they're trying to help the relationship to make it and heal. And when we're talking about individual work, that may be within the relationship or not, but I don't know that we overtly say, we are always thinking that everybody needs to stay here. For some people, choosing to get a divorce is the course that they need to take with their life and can actually end up leading to the most growth and healing for them. And for other people, staying in the relationship is the answer, or is the path that's really going to allow them to thrive in a way that they wouldn't by leaving.
I think also there's this piece of the partner wondering, are you doing enough fast enough? So a partner can say, well, I'm leaving because they really aren't in recovery. They really aren't serious about, fixing these pieces. And yeah, I would say at a point, right? If the addict really isn't owning and taking responsibility and doing something different, why would a partner stay?
Yeah. I wonder if there's an implied question here. And the implied question, which is sort of like the unfortunate cultural message that sometimes comes across, which is if somebody cheats on me, I'm out of there. Why would you ever stay with somebody who cheated with you, cheated on you? And I mean, I think we've been pretty consistent with our answer, which is until you're in that situation yourself, you just don't know. And until you're in a place where you have that deep of a relationship or that connection with another person, you know, and this has happened to you, it's not as easy to just throw it away as some people out there want to say it is.
Any more thoughts on this? It's a good question, and maybe we need to have more conversations about divorce, or what life in recovery looks like for different folks. It's not just a relationship.
Well, let me jump on this question a little bit and expand it. And let me ask you two. If you've got an addict or partner and they're in their relationship and they're struggling, are there are there indicators where you would be more likely to 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 guide them or to be present with them as they're moving towards and considering divorce? And are there indicators where you have, even though it's challenging, more hope that the relationship might make it?
This is going back. Um, this is before I was a CSAT, so I've been a clinician now for 25 years. So this is and a CSAT for 15. So this is before, and I was working with couples. And I had a couple come in and um, I saw them for probably a year and I was like, they're not gonna make it. And they were in a place where they're like, I think we're going to stop couples counseling for a while, and they did, and I thought, well, surely, right, that the relationship's over. And then they came back like 3 years later and said, we're still together and we want to continue therapy. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I completely called that wrong. And that was my lesson, that I can never, ever guide or project onto my client what they should or shouldn't do.
Yeah.
So I thought the indicators were there, and I was wrong. So what I'll do is I will mirror like crazy. So this is what you're experiencing. So this is what you're hearing. So this is what you're seeing. In a perfect world, what would it look like different? What can you do to create that perfect world then that you feel things are missing? So uh, yeah, is there, I don't know, what do you guys see? Are there indications that, wow, that they should really, throw in the towel here, or
I
keep,
would say the same thing, Wendy. Like I've seen those situations where it doesn't look so good and they're, really not thriving. Some of these things that aren't looking good. Sometimes people can really change things around and to really do the work. I think where I start, and I wouldn't, it's not my decision if someone's going to divorce or not. I'm not going to guide them one way or the other. What I will point out, I think to your point, Wendy, I'll reality what I'm seeing. If there's active abuse going on, that's a big concern. We have active physical abuse, especially, but I mean, emotional abuse, spiritual or sexual. If we have these things going on, that's a big problem. Like that's a big warning sign, obviously. Um,
would
I've
gas,
seen
would gaslighting be part
gas,
of
of course, yeah, psychological manipulation, emotional abuse, all that stuff, which is hard. I think that's the mirror, really hard to see. And sometimes I'll see the partner, and it's such a beautiful quality in most partners I've worked with. They can see the positive, they can see the best of their significant other. They see, who their addicted spouse could become, or who the flashes of a person, and almost want to hold on to that versus what the reality is, of what they're showing. So sometimes that's it. Like if is the person, I've had addicts flat out refuse they won't do the work. They don't think it's a problem, or they don't care, or maybe it's a problem but they're not going to do the work. These are really big concerning things for me. They're refusing, let's say partner wants to, or some other things that would help them feel safe, and the addict just disregards any of it. My concern, what I've seen happen, is if a partner stays in that type of relationship where they need certain things for relational healing and safety, and the addict's refusing, and the partner stays, oftentimes it's the partner that gets sick over time because their system never gets safe in the relationship, and they end up, with physical or emotional compromise. So I've seen that play out too many times. So that's a big concern. And the other way too, I've seen this where, some, like you mentioned this previously, Tim, I've seen some addicts in really good recovery. They're doing really good work, and the partner just can't get over the injustice. Like I don't want to go to therapy. I didn't cause this. And they're still kind of bitterness, and they never really do the healing work. That's a concern for me. For, is this relationship going to be viable and sustainable moving forward without significant problems and stuckness? So, I mean, there's more, but those are some big flags I see.
Yeah. I think the flags I see are right along those places. When we see the same patterns again and again and again and again, when the consistent pattern is, if this person would change, everything would be fine, whether that's coming from the addict or the partner.
Yeah.
Um, but the other piece that I lean into, that I hear you guys mirroring, is, as a therapist, it is not my job, and I actively work to avoid telling people what they should do with their relationship. I will walk this path with them, and They have to find their way through. And I may have my own thoughts and personal opinions, but my job is to not tell you what path to walk, but be the Sherpa to help you understand the landscape you're in.
Great.
The Sherpa.
I like that.
I, that's one of my favorite metaphors. I love being a Sherpa for people in recovery and their whole path of healing, whatever that looks like.
So
Yeah.
for those that don't know that term, do you wanna define that term?
A Sherpa is somebody who guides mountain climbers and helps them to get to the top, but it's not their job to walk them on the path. It's their job to help the mountain climber know what the landscape is so the mountain climber can figure out how challenging of a path they want to take and what their destination might look like and what their experience might be.
Beautiful.
Love it. That's a great place. I think a place to close.
Yep.
So on that metaphor. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks you too for the conversation. We would love to hear from you if you have more mailbag questions. It helps us think through things differently and help get your questions answered. So if you have more questions, please feel free email us. Let's see if I can get the email address right. conversations.sar@gmail.com. And thanks for joining us. Please like, subscribe, and this has been helpful. Pass to someone you know. And we would love to join you next time. Thanks.
Well.